So the question, Professor Ferris, was, what, if anything, can you tell us about the proximity of the head to that curtain at the time that that pattern of blood staining on it occurred?
Well, really all that you can say about the blood stains is that that gunshot wound to Robin Bain, and I'm assuming that that is his blood and brain tissue, must have been above where the stains begin on the curtain at some point, and that those are drips from the wound and not splatter when the wound was sustained.
And as far as, that's talking about above, and what about out from the curtain? How far would the head have to have been for that drip pattern to have?
Yeah, that, I would prefer not to give that evidence. That requires actual mathematical calculation based on the size, shape, and direction of the wounds, and really that's not my role.
So be it.
What did you say there on the size, shape, and direction of the what?
Of the stains themselves, the pattern of stains.
Yes.
There are, in fact, accurate mathematical formulas for determining the distance and source, but you know, that, in light of the evidence available to me, I don't think I could do that.
If Robin Bain was shot somewhere within this vicinity, how would his, you talk about him falling, but how would his body have fallen?
Is he an expert on that? So can we first just establish whether this witness has any expertise in how bodies that he's seen being shot fall to the ground?
Well, we've had this point before, Mr. Reid.
Yes, well, sorry.
With the pathologists, and I've allowed the question on the basis that medical experience must surely fit an expert such as Professor Ferris to express an opinion about the matter.
As to how a live body collapses after it's been shot?
Yes. Oh. On the basis of medical experience, medical training and knowledge.
Well, I don't think it's the experience, it might be some knowledge, but there we go.
Right. Yes, Mr. Raftery.
Yeah. Going back to the question, are you able to, again, feel free to say no if you can't, but are you able to tell us if how, there may be a number of variables I accept, but how that body might have fallen when shot?
Well, I have to, I suppose to some extent, Your Honour, qualify my answer. I've only ever once seen an individual shot. But the important thing to know is how a body would normally respond to a gunshot wound. And in spite of what you may see in movies and so on, unless it's an extremely high caliber gunshot wound, a body is not significantly moved away by a gunshot wound to the head. Effectively, it will depend entirely on the extent of brain damage and whether or not any voluntary or involuntary movement can be performed after the gunshot wound. My understanding from Dr. Dempster is that Robin Bain's brain was fragmented along the track of the bullet. And therefore, I would have thought that he would simply drop down. Now, if he was already moving in some direction at the time that he was shot, then he may be capable of continuing to move in that direction, although not in a voluntary or knowing way. So there are a lot of variables, but the general rule would be that once a gunshot wound is sustained, the movement of the body is dictated by gravity.
And you've said, contrary to popular, I forget what you phrased, but popular imagination, people aren't, in fact, moved by the bullet themselves unless it's particularly high caliber, just so that we know what sort of caliber is 2.2 in the hierarchy of power.
Well, it's not just a question of caliber, it's a question of muzzle velocity and the momentum that the bullet, the kinetic energy that the bullet contains itself, because high velocity military rounds are virtually the same as 2.2. They're .222 rounds generally, fired out of weapons like the Armalite rifle and so on. And of course they're extremely damaging. But even those, generally speaking, just cause an individual to collapse, and they don't move maybe more than a few inches.
If Robin Bain had been kneeling at the time that he was shot, how would you expect the body to move?
Again, it would be depending how he's kneeling, but I think the best thing to do is to assume that he would move where gravity allowed him to move.
Dr. Dempster, in his evidence, commented on the actual trajectory of the bullet in this particular case as being unusual in his experience. And I think you're aware of that.
Yes.
What was comment, if any, do you have on the trajectory of the bullet in this case?
It clearly is a bullet that has passed from left to right and almost directly backwards and across the skull. I think, one sees trajectories in almost all directions, from both self-inflicted and accidental and intentional wounds. So other than to say that it's a little unusual in that it's from the left to right, I'm not sure that it means a great deal.
As far as the issue of whether it was self-inflicted or inflicted by another, does it help you one way or the other?
Only in as much as it allows you to reconstruct the direction that the barrel was pointing, because that's one of the things that you can do in the reconstruction of a gunshot wound, unless there is some intervening target. You line up the track of the bullet with the barrel of the gun, and that is will vary very slightly, and even a bullet fragmenting as it goes through the skull is not the path and track through the skull is fairly easy to predict, and I have no disagreement with Dr. Dempster's reconstruction.
In terms of your assessment as to whether this was or was not suicide, were there any other factors you took into account?
I think probably the range is the most important factor. I cannot recall ever seeing a suicide on a firearm using a silencer, but that may be the experience of different with other people, other pathologists, but I certainly can't recall ever seeing a silencer used in a suicide case.
So that your overall conclusion in this case as to whether Robin Bain committed suicide or not is what?
Well, based on my interpretation of the gunshot wound, I think you can reasonably exclude suicide.